Hello, everybody. We welcome you to the second day of the IXI Summit 2021. This is obviously a very important panel of investors who are going to express their frank and honest views on how the investment landscape is in edutech. And I'm joined by a really, really good panel. And I am excited because I also want to ask them a bunch of questions that I don't know the answers to. So in no particular order, I want to start with Mr. Dhianu Das of Alfa Ventures. He's the founder. Please, sir, can you come on stage? And I'll just start reading the names of the different founders and investors who are on the panel. So Mr. Dhianu Das is here. Next up is Mr. Sarvesh Kanodia from Omidyar. He's a principal there and he manages all their edutech investments. So we're very happy to have him on here. Mr. Manish Johari from Lead Angels. Mr. Rahul Agarwalla from Sense AI Ventures. Shiva from Ankur Capital, where he's a VP. Rahul Agarwalla, sorry, one thing I forgot to mention, he's a managing partner. This is, I think, the third time I've been on a panel around him. He's about to speak. He's one of my favorite speakers. I'm very happy to have him on the panel where I get to ask questions. Mr. Vinod Keni from Artha Venture Fund, where he's a growth partner. Mr. Vikram Gupta of IVCap Ventures, where he's a founder and managing partner. And then me, Rahul, I'm from Hunch Ventures. And I'll just go around now, I'll just name individual speakers and they can give a short introduction about themselves. Mr. Das, we'll start with you. Okay, Mr. Das doesn't seem to be on. Shiva, let us start with you. You're the one who's top left on my screen, so you can go ahead first.
Thanks, Rahul. Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Shiva. I'm the VP at Ankur Capital. I look at the health and education investments for the fund. Ankur is a fund that was set up in 2014 to look at technology solutions for the next billion Indians.
I think, Shiva, we're having some issues with your audio while we try to resolve. I can switch to Mr. Rahul. Sir, please go ahead. Mr. Rahul, I think you're on mute.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Hi everyone, and thanks, Rahul. I'm Rahul Agarwalla. I'm the managing partner at Sense AI Ventures. We invest in early stage artificial intelligence and machine learning startups. We look for deep tech. That's what we really like, enjoy investing in. Happy to be here. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Rahul. Mr. Johari, it's over to you, sir.
Good morning, everyone. This is Manish Johari. I'm representing Lead Angels, where I am Senior Vice President. And Lead Angels, as a philosophy, invests sector agnostic. And sorry, can you hear me? Now better?
In an increasingly connected world, sometimes we are slaves to the data connectivity that we have. So, Mr. Kanodia, over to you, sir.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sarvesh, part of the investments team here at Omidyar Network India. Omidyar Network India is an impact-focused investment fund founded by Pierre Omidyar, who's the founder of eBay. We've been investing in India for 10 plus years now, deployed $350 million in capital across different spaces, including education, financial services, content, mobility, property rights, governance, citizen engagement. Happy to be here as part of the panel.
For 5 years, that was funded by Omidyar. So I've had personal experience working with your team is just great. Yeah. So Mr. Das, over to you, sir.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Dhianu Das. I am managing partner for Alfa Ventures. We invest in early stage, idea stage, I would say, startups, and have done about 30 plus investments so far in the last 5 years. We are sector agnostic.
Mr. Das, I think your connectivity is also bad. I would rely on my fellow panelists to back me up every now and then, if I so that I don't get caught being the one that has the bad connection.
You can't hear me at all?
Now it's good.
Okay. Okay. So again, I'll start. Hello, everyone. I think the technology is literally, taking over the world, and the most common words we use is, "Can you hear me? Can you see me?" So that's what is happening. My name is Dhianu Das.
Mr. Gupta, sir, are you able to hear us?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi everyone. Vikram.
Go ahead. A little bit about yourself.
Very happy to be here. So thanks for having me here.
Rahul, it's over to you. I think you might be on a delay.
No, I was just waiting for the connectivity to be restored. I didn't know if it was my fault or it was on the other people's fault. Okay. So people are saying that it's probably an issue on my end. That's interesting. Okay. So just to get everybody started, in case we do face connectivity issues and just the flow needs to keep going, the structure of the questions that I'll be asking is mostly keeping the audience in mind, where there's a lot of people who are interested in understanding how they can take their own entrepreneurial journey going forward. So to start off, it's a very, very simple question that a lot of people want the answers to, is the past year or two have been huge for EdTech. Is what we are seeing now, with the very fact that we are in a conference about EdTech, is it hype, or is it something that is fundamentally changing in the way people learn and live and work? I'll open the floor for somebody to start answering, and then we can just take that up organically, because I think this is a question that everybody will have an opinion on. So let's start with Sarvesh. You can go ahead.
Yeah, happy to start. I think first of all, it's not like EdTech was a sector. It's a sector. Definitely, it has boomed significantly in the last 2 years. But I think the growth patterns were there even before that. Yes, it was more muted than than earlier, and for a variety of reasons, right? When you look at the overall ecosystem, we are more comfortable doing an online, sort of commerce transaction or a payment transfer. As opposed to buying education online. So I think that's the curve that we've gone through as a country as well, where we sort of got on WhatsApp, started making payments, started, getting into commerce, and then buying essentially education, which is more of a services, driven product as such, right? Which in that sense has a higher bar, from that perspective. And as a result, we are sort of seeing that, growth sort of happen now. And I think that growth is here to stay. And for a variety of reasons, right? I think one, primarily when you look at the companies which are operating in the sector, all of this growth is sort of, one is, the investment that is coming into the sector, but that investment is actually backed by the traction that these companies are getting. And, this is something that we are seeing both within our portfolio and across, where literally because of, and especially after COVID, that growth has sort of accelerated by almost a year, right? So the targets that you would have had for 2021 got met in 2020. And people have sort of rejigged their business plans. And as a result, there is all the excitement that is happening. So I think one, there is traction. Secondly, what it has also helped, because each of us now are in our conference, sort of rooms online, no matter what our age group, the kids are doing their, education in school through online wherever possible. So I think across age groups, there's also an awareness, that has increased post-COVID. Where earlier, you were sort of thinking it as an option. It's no more an option in that sense, right? You've been sort of forced in some sense to do it, and which is why there's a lot more awareness. And as a result, if there is a quality offering which is available to you, then it makes sense to sort of sign up for it, right? Which is why it is important for EdTech companies, to focus both on accessibility, reaching out to users who otherwise would not have access to, let's say quality education offline? How do you provide them better than they would have gotten offline, and that's the result they would want to sign up? And given the advantages that you have of running an online venture, can you actually provide it cheaper? So I think if companies are able to solve for this, then I think this growth will be here to stay. And given what we see again both across our portfolio companies and more broadly, we definitely see those trends both in the K-12, in the post K-12, be it skilling, upskilling across segments today.
Okay, thank you. Shiva, same question over to you. Do you think it's hype, or do you think there is justification in the way that the market's changing?
Yeah, so just building on what Sarvesh said, and just to go to your original question as well, Rahul, I think the trend is actually older than 2-3 years ago, because if we look at the broader landscape, you've had the educoms, etc., who were kind of from the previous generation, where the thesis was, hey, B2B is the way to scale. And I think what changed is about 3-4 years ago, we started feeling like there were enough startups being established, really going at a B2C strategy and being successful there, and saying, now, because of all the trends that Sarvesh has spoken about, even education is a trend where we're comfortable transacting online for. And that's where the actual transition has happened, because the B2B market, if we look holistically, it has been a bit more restricted. And because of the alignment of incentives, I think of the complicated structures of who you'd be selling to has been a bit more of a challenge. In the B2C segment, we've seen this growth, but it's still in a very narrow set. That I think most of the growth is still in the K-12 or your skilling to get into college segments. I think what is exciting about the space is that still leaves you a lot of white spaces, including large markets, of saying, can you now try to provide a service towards college students later on in their journey as they're looking to get placed? Because while there are startups in that space, they've still been fairly nascent to now. And that's what we're looking to deploy in as well, of saying, maybe the K-12 space, it's probably too late to set up another startup that will be able to become another unicorn in this space. That is probably something will consolidate from where it is now. But I think in the higher ed space, there's a number of opportunities that are looking attractive to us at this moment.
Okay. So one of the, does anybody else have a strong opinion on this, whether if it is hype, like something that's a contrarian opinion? Rahul, I see you smiling. Over to you.
So I'm just going to add a different flavor to the perspectives. I agree largely with the perspective they've shared. But you see, the key transition for my mind, and Shiva mentioned about that B2B has always been far more restricted and slower to adopt technology. And just to put that in context, if if a doctor and a teacher from 100 years ago were to time travel to the present, the doctor would be just amazed. He wouldn't be able to believe what's happening in the operating theater, what machines look like, what kind of reports you have. The teacher would just pick up the chalk and start teaching, right? So that is the fundamental difference. You see, educational institutions before pre-COVID did not really change. But today they have no choice. Campus is not there. You can't take up the chalk and start teaching. It doesn't work like that anymore. It's not as easy as that. So to me, the bigger change, COVID, to my mind, is actually a bigger impact for B2B than B2C. Consumers, especially students, have been digital for much longer. And of course, here also, then it breaks down into the segment that has smartphones and has laptops versus the segment that doesn't. But at a broader level, what I'm trying to say, COVID is a massive changer for educational institutions to modernize, to go digital, to really participate in this economy. And you'll also find that, maybe that's for later, but how the policies environment is also being shaped up accordingly.
That's actually a great point to segue. I want to start off with Mr. Gupta. There is going to be some market consolidation that's going to happen now. Now that the reality is changing, it is moving from the fact that there was a honeymoon period. COVID was also almost a honeymoon period for several people to sandbox their approaches and so on. But now, now that things are going to go back to normal, so to speak, do you think there's going to be some market consolidation in terms of the landscape?
So I think I totally agree with the views which are presented earlier in terms of how pandemic is changing the whole industry and the environment. And of course, that has been one of the other reasons why there's a substantial amount of shakeout also which has happened, right? So there is one fundamental thing which has happened. If you imagine, let's say if the pandemic had happened in 2010 versus now, the difference would have been very, substantial, because, the last 10 years have seen a very interesting evolution of smart devices, internet access, tier 2, tier 3 towns getting involved, amount of funding available, how the startups have come up, so if this pandemic had happened in 2010, you wouldn't have seen this kind of a change that has happened in the last 1 year. Of course, we've seen a substantial mindset change which has happened, but at the same time, I think what we've also seen is, separation of boys from men, in terms of, people who were able to deal with the scenario. Nobody was prepared for what was going to happen March onwards last year. But when things started happening, of course, there was a substantial shakeout in terms of, how people were managing their burns, their, other costs, and the growth that they were projecting. Many of them were actually thinking of going to the market to raise their funds, and that went away. So the result of that was obviously that, some of these people who were not managing their businesses efficiently were actually, they were the losers in the game. Even though Edtech as an industry gained substantially, because a lot of investors started focusing on investing in the space, and this sector naturally has, this online component. The schools very easily shifted from the offline to online, and the kids are still getting educated very well, and this education started reaching to much farther distances. But I think people who haven't been able to manage their operations well are actually now in a situation where they're just somehow looking to either partner with someone or even get bought out, and that's where the consolidation aspect comes into play. And I think there will be some consolidation, and you will see some of that starting to happen even now onwards.
Okay. Manish sir, I hope you can hear me. What about the same question over to you, sir? There are several new companies that are coming up, and one of the companies that is in your portfolio, Okipoki, the idea of how they have evolved and how they have come to the fore during this pandemic, right, is something that I find to be fascinating. So if you could talk about in general how they have approached this, and in also how the market scenario has panned out according to you that has happened since COVID.
Thanks, Rahul. Firstly, am I audible or not? Am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible to me.
I can hear, sir.
Okay, great. So, first things first, if we are talking about how the pandemic has shaped investment decisions, I mean, prior to COVID, we'd already invested in 2 or 3 edtech startups. And the investor world, as such, if you see, has been investing into education technology startups right in the days of, you had some Merit Nation, which had been invested long time back. You had Liquid. You had companies which had been invested. The interesting part is that pre-COVID, Merit Nation, which was an edtech startup, got acquired by Akash. Okay, which was surely saying that to grow as a technology player in the education sector is a challenge, because to monetize it, to get a parent to shell out cash was a pain point, was a major pain point. Okay, and COVID happens, all schools are shut down, all universities are shut down, all colleges are shut down, and what you have, I mean, a few months down the line, I mean, right at the beginning of the year, You see Byju's, which acquires Akash. I mean, that is the effect that COVID has had. Okay. And what Okipoki was doing, I'm like, it always had that mantra, because this founder is a person who till the age of 12 could not read or write well enough in English. Okay. The teachers took notice, they worked extra with him, and he managed to join Stephens and then IIM, and then of course head, say, YouTube India. Okay. But not every child has those kind of facilities available. Okay. And what typically happens is that kids, they try and they ask a problem. Their problems are not even heard by the teachers, because he may be talking in his own language, you know. He may be talking in Bengali, he may be talking in Marathi, he may be talking in Odia or Telugu. Now, when a kid asks that problem and the teacher does not understand that, the kid will go into the shell. That is exactly the problem that he was sorting out, because he faced the same problem. He said, can I create an app which allows people to ask and learn in their own mother tongues? That is what he did, and that's how he was able to scale from probably 60,000 users to 2.5 lakh users today on the app. What COVID also did to this was that he saw increasingly people were asking him that our classes are not happening. Do you have teachers who can tutor our kids? And that's how the live classes part started, and that's how the monetization began. So COVID has made users realize that digital is the way to go to buy services, to use services, and to experience some things which you can never ever experience in the real world. That's my two things in this. And Okipoki has now been able to, not only is that, but there are people who are asking them, you know, can you help in some creative or logical reasoning kind of classes? And you are having different revenue streams starting out for that startup. I mean, that's what, say, COVID has done. And a propensity to pay is what has been allowed through the COVID. And the biggest example is, so my wife, she used to go for shopping every week, maybe once. Okay. Now today she can be on shopping every day. Okay. I think Rahul cannot hear me. So Rahul, over to you.
I think we can, we've just had Mr. Keni also join us. Mr. Keni, sir, welcome. We've had a few discussions already. Can you hear me, sir?
Good morning, gentlemen. Sorry, we had a few technical glitches. The challenges of technology, which I think we finally overcame.
Yeah, I had a big moment when I realized it was my connection that was bad and not everybody else's. So yeah, join the club. So what we've spoken so far, we were discussing the general landscape of how Edtech has evolved over the past few years. If it was hype or if it was if there is actually basis in reality for it. We're also trying to understand a little bit more about the portfolio startups that you have. I'm just going in a random order, but I've had Mr. Das, who's been interestingly observing some of the points that others have made. I'm going to reach out to him first and then over to you for your thoughts on the matter. Mr. Das, over to you, sir.
Sure.
I think most of the points are already covered. I think everybody have said what is actually needs to be told. What I personally feel, COVID actually brought out focus in the men from the boys, and it have been a churning, point where people who were just doing it for the sake of doing it, like log kya kahenge, they just shut it down completely. There were some startups, I would say, who were just doing it for the sake of it. No, I will not shut down. And that was really good point. Second, who were really, really doing well, we were just discussing about how Byju was acquired when Manish said that Byju acquired First, they acquired White Hat Junior. That was focusing on revenue. The way they created the revenue, they created an army of salespeople from the kits itself, and that's when Baiju took it over and have a great revenue. And then they took over Akash, which is a brick and mortar, which is having more than 250,000 students, and completely brick and mortar product from the ages old way of teaching. I think this particular year, what Vikramji said, that if it happened in 2010, it was not the impact the way it has impacted today. This change was much needed. I used to use Zoom, and 99% of people used to say, "What is Zoom?" I said, "Look, I think let's try it." Most of my family members never use Zoom, and now my younger daughter, who is 9-year-old, she knows how to use Apple more than I know or my family member know, because she's taking her classes on computer, and they are hacking things where teacher are looking at them and they are doing what they want to do. It's we were like that before, and they are literally creating things which we never dreamed of creating at the age of 9, because this pandemic brought out a lot of focus in them. And the future is technology. Absolutely, future is all about using devices, using artificial intelligence, using like what Manish said, that wife is going shopping every day. I think same is in my house. And the best part, they all are searching for the best deals. And when they're doing some shopping, and they are going on different websites, and even comparing, sitting at home, sitting in different room, comparing different sites, buying the same thing for snipping some extra discounts or some extra deals, which is really, really good, which is actually making people save a lot of money when it comes to shops and all that. When the people used to open, I remember Zara showroom was paying 2 crore 50 lakh rent in Mumbai, and there was a big news about 5-6 years back, and they can save that kind of money per month and put it on online and give it back to their people. So the cost of overhead cost can go down. Same thing with Edtech. Edtech, the deals have gone down. I mean, if you see 2019, the deals were above 600, and they have gone down to 400. But the investments have gone up. Huge investments have gone up. So the ticket size is gone up. The acquisitions have gone up. And I think 2020 have taught a lot of us that M&A is the future, whether it's Edtech or anything. And this has given an opportunity. Who could have thought that Akash would sell for $1 billion? I think it was a big news. And a lot of acquisitions for M&As happening in Edtech made it possible for young players to solve a small problem, and then I'll be acquired by a big player. This is what was happening in the West, not in India. And I think this is what particularly I would say that added a lot of value to India and to the Edtech industry. The way I would put it, I think the next 10 years, the entire thing will change. The Edtech and the startup, we can easily become the startup capital of the world. Absolutely. Already we are number one in the technology. TCS is number one company in the world, followed by Shanker. And in Edtech, Baiju is number one company in the world. So definitely, India is rocking, and it will be a absolutely. Thank you.
Absolutely. So everybody, we are at the halfway point of this conversation. Since this is an investment panel, one of the things that a lot of people in the audience would actually want to know is the individual VCs that are on this panel. What is their outlook? What are the trends that they are going to see that will need funding coming up? What are some, and this is a personal question that I'm also a little curious about, is what do you think the trends that have not yet come to the come to the forefront, but are developing in this space. Mr. Keni, I will direct this question to you first, and then we can go accordingly. If anybody has a point to make, just please, do the traditional raise your hand, and I would switch over to you.
Sure. So good morning, everybody, and it's a pleasure to be part of the panel, especially with some of the people who are friends and who haven't had the opportunity of seeing in person over the last 1 year due to the pandemic. So Edtech has been the flavor of the month, or at least the flavor of the year so far, and has attracted its own share of attention, as well as its own share of entrepreneurs and investors too, and it will continue to do that. But I think 2021 will also see a bit of a maturation of some of these companies, and you're starting to see a little bit of that with the way some of the better funded companies like Byju's, Vedantu, Unacademy, some of them are really getting ahead and leaving the competition behind, and I think that will continue, which will also mean that there will be selective acquisitions happening, which will also indicate that there will be some level of consolidation. What I have not seen, and where I think there is significant opportunity, has been with the whole workforce development or the reinvigoration of human capital, which is one of the pillars of what this whole budget was all about, right? And I think that's one area where, especially with reskilling, upskilling, and with this emphasis on the gig economy, I see a lot of that starting to happen, right? And especially when we start looking at wanting to be a very attractive destination for manufacturing, and if we really want to be able to provide that level of expertise, we also have to make sure that we have the workforce that is adequately trained to be able to do that. So I think that's an opportunity that's fairly significant, especially when it starts coming down to newer ways of manufacturing, some of the newer processes that are part of the manufacturing process. So reskilling, upskilling is one area where I see significant opportunities. The infrastructure and the back-end pieces, especially on education, because there's a lot of the emphasis on the front end of being able to integrate and work with students. And I think that process has seen a fair amount of investor interest and also a lot of entrepreneurs doing business there. But I think the plumbing piece is something that my feeling is, you'll start seeing a fair amount of action this year. And I think the other pieces where I also tend to think that there will be significant opportunity is the ability for some of these companies that have built product, or at least have solutions that have worked in India, to start really looking at going outside of India, right? So for them to start looking at emerging markets first. And I think that's an opportunity that's also awaiting us in 2021. And then, of course, the more increased use of AI in the modes of instruction. And I think, right now, it's happened in that. I think that's another area that offers quite a lot of opportunities there. Last but not least is teacher training. I mean, everybody talks about wanting to get enough teachers, but I don't think we have enough good teachers. And if you have to really get good teachers, and especially some of those teachers have to be aligned with what the demands of the companies, the employers, and the world around us, which has changed dramatically, is going to be needed. I think we also need to make sure that our teachers are trained and trained well. And I think that's an opportunity which I have not seen too many companies personally, but I think that's another opportunity that's out there for entrepreneurs to look at.
Okay, so if anybody in the audience is in any of these categories, you know who to reach out to. So yeah, Shiva, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Rahul. So I agree with some of the sectors that Vinod noted. I just kind of clarify that from our position, I think I'll break the models into two. One is models that make sense from a purely domestic sense. And if we look at those models, just the market size and the opportunity that's there from a B2B2C of saying, if you can now get these students on board, similar to what ClassPlus did from a tuition center model, but say we can offer this as a free solution to schools because we're looking as a way to get this to lead gen to get students on board. I think that's one of the few gaps that really still exists in the K-12 space because B2C feels like it's quite saturated. And outside of that, I'd say the higher ed space and thinking of opportunities right from students in college of saying, how can you actually get job ready? How can you actually build a college community, a series of college communities by which there's a broad network building out and find ways to monetize that. I think those are interesting opportunities we're seeing. So right from that space to early working professionals who are in their first few years and like Vinod mentioned, looking for reskilling, looking to upskill with more advanced versions of the curriculum. I think that's still, there's some players in that version of the space, but it's growing and it's far from saturated. So there's definitely an opportunity to set up now and still aggressively address those markets. Two, where I feel it's probably a bit more global are, as Vinod mentioned, teacher training is a big gap. But I think getting a business model built out from an Indian context may be a bit of a challenge. So we see that as saying, can you build from here and then say there's other regions that are sensible for you to really be able to expand to long term. I'm not saying it will be something that happens in the short term, but say that here's where we see the market really playing out. And the other would be on extracurricular material, where at this point, I think there's enough of us that all know students who are taking a range of hobby classes outside of even what White Hat is offering online, from be it through formal portals or indirectly. But I think that's a change that will come in consumer behavior. Some of this will stick on, some of it will go back to being an offline setting the moment these institutions can reopen. So there needs to be a large enough market to addressing that. But if you can build something from here that's applicable to a number of other geographies, I think that's an attractive proposition to look at.
Mr. Manish, yes, sir.
Yeah, so one thought process is that Mark Twain probably had traveled to 2020-21. And that's when he said, you know, I won't let my schooling interfere with my education. Today is the time when any child can actually get education without even going to the school. I mean, that's exactly what's happening. And while, yes, there is an opportunity to have a TCS kind of thing, I'm like the way we had IT when we had body shopping, Indians going abroad, we'll have teachers sitting in singular buildings and teaching the world, the global world. So the teacher training is, of course, very important. But one key thing, while people are feeling that B2C is an opportunity which is saturated, but the Bharat inclusion, that is a whole lot of open audience and consumers and customers that you have left. Are people really targeting that? Are we actually looking at people, upliftment of people? I'm like, today my maid, she comes to me and, Bhaiya, please download this app for me because mere bachcho ko unka exam is par dena hai. I gave her my smartphone, which I had stopped using because I bought a new one. So now your maids have that, and that is the same thing will percolate down to the tier 2, tier 3 cities. So the Cashify and the Servify of the world, they will ensure that people will move from feature phones to maybe refurbished, say, smartphones. Okay, so the opportunity is huge, and people who are targeting Bharat inclusion, I think that's a very, very interesting play how it will happen. And India is a market which typically does not allow monopolies. Like in US, you had only Amazon, you had only, say, Salesforce, you had only Microsoft and Apple. In India, we can have 4 or 5 different players. And still, there are a lot of opportunities in K-12. And one more thing is the employability side, which, say, Vinod and say, Shiva have already shared. Employability, I mean, using that education for gainful employment, that is one of the key things. So vocational trainings would be a big market that we could be looking at.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Rahul.
He's the one who will power us all.
So I'm just going to add on to what Vinod was saying about AI. I think artificial intelligence has a lot of scope in education. But at the same time, I'm also circumspect this, partly because there's a lot of ground still left for the entire digitization story itself to play out. So, you know, what Manish said, you know, there's a whole bunch of people who are unaddressed today. So there may be larger opportunities there, but I still think that artificial intelligence is definitely an opportunity to use, from whether it is assessments to teaching to homework to prep, all of those pieces. And especially if you're building for the world, I think that makes absolute sense to look at a technology-oriented play. The second piece I would say is think about unbundling. Fundamentally, schools didn't only give you teaching, right? It is a bundle of services which a school offered. You got from discipline to extracurriculars to sports to all of that in one single place. So it was looking at development, not just at education. So, but all that is getting unbundled, right? You will have the teaching piece, which is moving faster online than any of the other pieces of the entire education pie, right? So think about that as an opportunity itself and see how the market will shape. I mean, if you told me that after 10 years, most people will still look for getting the degrees this good old way, it may not be true, right? No longer. While this change has been predicted multiple times, I think it's finally here where the environment supports that kind of change. And, whether it's companies hiring and they are being much more flexible, they don't keep on asking you which college you went to and what degree you got and the marks you got to. So the change is there in every aspect. So look at that whole unbundling piece.
Excellent. Sarvesh, I have a pointed question for you. I know Omidyar is big into investing in companies that have a social impact as well, right? The idea that this lockdown and COVID has created is a large-scale democratization of society. There has been democratization being achieved in a large number of sectors. Now, I think one of the other panelists, I think Manish sir had pointed this out earlier, is that education also is becoming increasingly accessible to everybody at this point, regardless of what your stand in society is. But for democratization, there also needs to be government policy that supports it. Vikram sir was mentioning the budget, the impact that is happening right now. What are some general trends that you observe, and what government policy that you feel is necessary to support these trends?
I think on this one, the good thing with the national education policy is it's quite forward-looking in that sense. Where they have actually laid emphasis on areas where going beyond numeracy literacy. So, for example, I think life skills was a question that was there as part of the Q&A as well. Someone had asked. Now, that is something that the government, for example, is emphasizing on. One of our own portfolio companies, which is on the not-for-profit side, Dream a Dream, they've actually worked very closely with the Delhi government in launching the happiness curriculum program. And that is all built around the life skills, program that Dream a Dream was running on the ground for, almost 15, 20 years. Before state governments actually even noticed it and wanted to sort of implement it, right? So sort of pioneers, from that perspective. And now seeing the fabulous results on the ground, from that curriculum, there are other state governments who are also now adopting, a version of the happiness curriculum focusing on life skills. So they're already working with 5-6 different states, either on the curriculum side or on the teacher training side, and helping them integrate life skills as part of the curriculum. So this is again something that the new, national education policy emphasizes, the need for life skills and going beyond numeracy literacy. If you look at the recent notification, there's a whole CBSE reforms also that is being talked about, where again, how do you change the way where you're evaluating students, right? And I think that again will play a role in how education is imparted in the school itself. Starting with, I'm assuming, CBSE reforms, but then eventually percolating to other state board reforms as well. And we're already hearing about other state boards also thinking about how they can, reform their board exams, reform their curriculum, etc. With some of our own portfolio companies like Dream a Dream playing a significant role in that. So I think one is that. The other, emphasis which we are seeing as part of NEP is again on the early childhood, education part of it. This, if you see the education structure has been largely ignored today. Where a lot of the, in the public school space, for example, it happens in the Anganwadi, where there are more considerations beyond education, it's health, it's nutrition, a lot of other things, that take focus. And as a result, education does get left behind. What they're now talking about is integrating education inside the school itself. And which is why it's not actually K-12 anymore, it's pre-K to 12, now, because sort of pre-K is also integrated as part of the school curriculum. And that again is for us at ON also a key area of focus where we are actively, looking at investments, because while, as we've been talking about, a lot of the EdTech wave has, for example, focused on the grade 6 to 12 test prep, etc. But early childhood hasn't seen as much action. And I think for us, that's a space that is of importance. We've invested in the past. We sort of stopped in the middle for some time, but again, it's a space where we are, actively investing, and you'll hear more from us, on that in the coming months. So I think across on the K-12 side, both on the life skill side and the pre-K side, I think we'll see action. There's policy action happening, and as a result, I think we'll see startups as well, emerging out of that. And obviously, there'll be not-for-profits who are also working in that space, in order to sort of cater to the public school system as well. We were speaking about the post K-12 side. There's a lot of work happening around the skilling. We've been involved with the Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship and helping, them also in the process as such. So, there's a lot of work that will happen both on the vocational skilling side, but we're also seeing activity in the startup side of it. Where, for example, there are startups which are focusing on roles that earlier we would not think about, and it could be things like makeup, content creation, comedy artists, singers. Like, how do you even train people to get into these roles? Moving beyond your traditional sort of sales, ops kinds of roles, because all of these new vocations are also coming up. So can you actually engage, sort of individuals and get them to train and start working? And in these cases, there will not actually be jobs, that these people will get into. They'll probably become freelancers. They'll probably become micro entrepreneurs, and there'll be different outcomes. But again, I think that's a space that we are quite excited about, in terms of the activity, that we are seeing.
Excellent. Thank you. One of the questions that we've gotten is quite interesting, and I'd like to slightly rephrase it. So they've asked about the applicability of EdTech when it comes to manufacturing. And of course, this is something that all of India is focused on right now, at least the government is focused on. And I understand that there are certain technologies now that are used in surgery, in medicine, where XR is being used, extended and augmented reality is being used to help train surgeons better, to help train nurses better. I think the applicability of that can extend to manufacturing as well. If you have any specific thoughts on this subject, on how the applicability of AR, VR, XR towards the development of manufacturing edutech in our country. This is an open question. If anybody has a thought on it. Yeah, Mr. Das.
Mute, Mr. Das. Probably
Mr. Das, I think you're on mute.
I'm sorry. So I've been part of the IXI, and there, I met many startups. There are a lot of things which are, been happening in AR, VR. I remember there was one particular startup which was focusing on, I think, particularly on the medicine manufacturing units. And the machineries are very expensive, and, you cannot train people that fast. They are so expensive that they need to have a 10-year, 12-year experience. But how can you have 10-year, 12-year experience when you are expanding like the way India is expanding in 2021, or will be expanding for the next 10 years? So that AR, VR can actually give the real, touch and feel, or not touch and feel, it can give the real experience of the person who is getting trained to operate the machine or even repair the machine. I think that will change the entire dynamics of manufacturing industries, including, when these trainings are happening on site or, off site as well, this will give them a real experience. So people who are not from the domain can also get experimented with this thing and can do the course on AR, VR, and simply go to companies and say, look, we have done this AR, VR. Now we need to, just simply get some real hands dirty on the job.
Shiva?
Yeah, so I agree with what Mr. Das said. There's a number of actual startups that are there playing in this space of saying extended reality, of saying for specific verticals. You have a training, for example, we have a company that's in welding and painting training, of looking at how you can actually, rather than go through a training process that most IT guys do, where you have very limited time actually working on the job and working on joints, building these materials out as part of your cycle, because it's expensive. There's a lot of material you have to waste every time you do this. So can you incorporate these physical tools into your process by actually investing in VR, investing in extended reality tools, that once you've done that, every single batch of students can actually get considerably more time, and can bet when they are actually graduating and going to the market are actually much more skilled at their profession. So I think we're seeing those models now start to roll out for a variety of services. I heard of some companies that are using it for mining, etc., as well, as saying before you actually get out on the floor, we make sure you're going through these qualifications. So there's educational and B2B applications for these models.
Excellent, excellent. Mr. Gupta, followed by Mr. Keni.
Yeah, I think, of course, most of the points have already been covered. And I think I'll just address very briefly a question that you asked earlier in terms of, as investors, what we look for, as venture capital investors specifically. And I will just look at it in a way where if you look at a 2x2 metric, most of the, consulting world looks at a 2x2 metric. Look at the x-axis as the ideas and the y-axis as markets, and tested versus less tested, and likewise there. Typically when an entrepreneur is working on something which is in the tested idea in the tested market, obviously the risks are lower. Obviously the returns are also lower, right? So existing business models obviously working in existing markets, so competition is very high. But what we're seeing is with all these technologies we're talking about untested or less tested ideas in tested markets, right? And then extension of that into untested markets as well, like rural markets or multilingual markets or global markets, right? So which are, you're basically, which is where all these technologies are being. And I think the important part, specifically to your question also on the application of XR technologies, I think the important part there is, and we are all learning that as more and more data is generated in any area, whether it's healthcare or any vertical that you might take, the data itself becomes the basis of learning, right? So that's where the entire machine learning concept comes, right? So even in the field of manufacturing, as more and more data is getting generated, this data becomes available to these technologies to really be applied for exponential learning. So I think, which is where I see that we are at that point of inflection now. I think in the next couple of years, you will see a lot of this data which is getting generated and has got generated over time, that will become more and more used and usable, where, most of these newer ideas will start coming to, utilize this data and leveraging these technologies of, AI, ML, AR, VR, to build up new business models, which is what is exciting from a venture capital perspective. Right? We look for such opportunities where we can, invest in ideas like this.
Okay, thank you, sir. Mr. Vinod.
Yeah, so what I wanted to add is, I think a lot of these points have already been covered, and Vikram also alluded to the amount of data that's now going to get leveraged and monetized, right? And the ability for people to do it. I think what's also important for us as investors is to see the level of collaboration that's going to happen now, especially when we start looking at the next generation of people who are fully prepared for what the new world is going to be, right? And it's not just looking at kids, but also more from reskilling, upskilling, or even preparing them for some of these positions at the early stages of their professional career. And especially now, and I keep going back to this whole issue of manufacturing and a lot of the things that are happening, right? Because the rest of the world, if you really look, manufacturing, how things are being done, how research is being done, all of that has changed dramatically and continues to keep changing. And a lot of this is being, with the use of newer technologies that are coming, which essentially means that even when we look at traditional reskilling or upskilling or even vocational training for that matter, a lot of this is also got to be very collaborative, where we'll actually have to look at a lot of these technologies or the method of instruction coming in from other geographies. Maybe, we'll have to look at what is it that people have really done in other parts of the world and be able to use that, which means that entrepreneurs have to be very innovative. Not everything is homegrown. Some of this may be, combining things that work maybe in Korea or maybe in Vietnam or somewhere else and trying to see if that can also be adapted here. And I think a certain amount of that collaborative effort will also start happening, now as well as going into the future, because the traditional ways of what we were actually doing is not going to work anymore. And you alluded to that, the panel alluded to that as well, right? So, and I think that's going to be the case going forward, which means that there is this constant training and retraining of people that has to happen over a period of time so that they continue to be viable as employees. Because once you have that workforce, then you can attract investment, then you can build these manufacturing, these other kinds of facilities, and then can you really look at employment generation? Because ultimately all of this, if you look at the whole education system, is also about how do I really continue to open up and provide employment opportunities to the multitude of people who are sort of going to be joining this workforce. So I think that's an important aspect that will be taken into consideration. And I think, that's where there are also going to be some opportunities for us.
Okay, thank you, sir. The session's almost ending, and since I've not been part of one of these, I think the call might suddenly shut down. So I just wanted to quickly thank everybody who's been on this panel. There are several questions that we didn't actually get to. One of the trends that I would like to point out for people who are listening is to also look at companies like Harappa Education, which are not being hyped up as much right now, but these are the people focusing on life skills training, and they're catering to a very specific niche in the market. And that is also the niche that will pay a significant amount in terms of subscriptions and payments for you to actually build a product out in that sector. In fact, one of the themes that has come out of this talk is the separation of boys from men and the consolidation of the market. The next session is going to be exactly about that. It's about the edtech scenario post the COVID hype, and how a lot of these ideas will get validation from it. I personally am very thankful for the panel that's here. Certainly going to add everybody on LinkedIn. Thank you very much. I think this is quite good for me at least, and I appreciate everybody being here.